Good morning, delegates. This is the main stage once again. I'm Heather Reid and I'm delighted to warmly welcome you to this second morning of the CRNS annual conference. We're delighted that you could join us again or for the first time, and we really hope that you find today's conference programme exciting, interesting, engaging and really useful. We've had some wonderful feedback about yesterday's morning and we're looking forward to today's action. Of course, we're filming the whole conference too, as you probably know. And as you also know, our theme for this event is A Fairer Scotland and a Greener World. 2020 will always be remembered as the year of the pandemic. And of course, yesterday's announcements, I know, will adversely affect many of our members once again. It is a really devastating time. But as you also know, and as we heard yesterday, our climate emergency has not gone away. And I want to say a little bit more about that in a moment. But we hope that our fairer and greener theme seeks to bring the social and environmental opportunities that have been presented at this time centre stage as we continue to look to the future for the community resources sector here in Scotland. And we're doing it all digitally this year. With the weather outside, actually, it's probably not a bad idea. And we have the Hop-In platform, which is designed to mirror that face-to-face engagement that we normally have at a physical conference. So if I could start with just a quick reminder about the platform, especially for those who weren't here yesterday. You'll see on the left-hand side of the screen, we have various venue areas. There's reception, where you get all the links to what's happening. There's the main stage, which is where we're in at the moment, and it's where you'll see all the keynote presentations. You'll just see the main speakers on the screen, but you can engage via the chat box, which is on the right-hand side. There are two chat boxes, one for the whole event, which has been well used already this morning, and then there's a chat box for this main stage. And that's where I would encourage you to post any questions you have for any of our speakers. And if you could put a Q at the front, then it means that we can see it really quickly and then put it to our speakers during our Q&A sessions. On the right, you'll also see that there's a poll box, and we have two polls running. First, there'll be a poll for most of the morning about a fairer Scotland, and we'd encourage you to answer those questions if you can at some point, please. And then during our final session with Michael, we have a wee feedback poll, which we again would really encourage you to respond to. It helps shape future events. If you look on the left again now, you'll see there's the breakout session, which worked really well yesterday. It's where you attend one of the three options for the middle part of the morning, and I'll signpost that when we get to it. And they are aimed at more collaboration. There's an opportunity to engage more directly with the hosts. They'll actually be able to invite you to share your speaker and your camera as well, if you care to do so. So we're really trying to make it very interactive. And then there's the networking session. Again, I know it's been well used this morning already and worked really well yesterday. You can link up with other attendees. You can look over on the right-hand side at the People tab and find people from the organisations that you'd perhaps like to directly chat to. And there's private messaging and video calls available there. And then we have the marketplace, which again, I hope has been well used this morning. We have 13 stands on offer, so please take time to visit those. And again, you can, for most of them, live, direct engage with the members of staff there. So if you've just joined us, those stands are CRNS, Cycling Scotland, Keegan and Pennykid, Kudos Software, LARAC, Luma IT, Scottish Community Alliance, Partnership for Procurement, Social Enterprise Academy, Social Print and Copy, the Verdancy Group, Wheatley Group, and Zero Waste Scotland. And a huge thank you to them for all the efforts they've put in so far. Now, inevitably, we are still learning in this digital conference world. That goes for me too. So if you need any technical help, please email digitalstudio@wearecameron.com. They'll be able to assist you. And the CRNS stand in the marketplace is continually staffed as well. So if you need anything, just go there. So finally, I would like to thank all the sponsors of this conference, because without them, it definitely wouldn't be happening. And they are Keegan and Pennykidd, Keenan Recycling, Kudos Software, Wheatley Group, the Verdancy Group, Just Enterprise, and Zero Waste Scotland. Thank you so much for your support. And thank you to all our speakers, those exhibitors, Cameron Live, our technology partner who's keeping everything running smoothly, as well, of course, CRNS team who have done an amazing job to get this conference organised, and certainly what happened went really well yesterday. It's really appreciated. Now, before we move on to our first session, I'd just like to reflect a little bit on yesterday's session, especially when we were thinking about a greener world. As I said yesterday, 2020 will sadly and undoubtedly go down in history as the year of the modern pandemic. But the climate emergency has definitely not abated. Indeed, quite the opposite. And one of the most direct ways the climate emergency manifests itself is in severe weather, and 2020 was no different. We had record heat. 2020 is shaping up to be one of the 3 hottest years on record, and that's despite a cooling La Nina effect in the Pacific this year. And we already know that 2016 to 2020 will be the warmest 5-year period ever. And we saw at the beginning of the year record wildfires in Australia, devastating 18 million hectares of forest destroyed, over 400 lives lost, and a huge impact on wildlife and habitat in the area. And that was followed by heat and wildfires in Western America during the summer in states like California, Oregon, Nevada, Arizona, and again, millions of hectares of forests lost. And during the summer, it's also been actually a record-breaking hurricane season. I think that's kind of flown under the radar a little bit, obviously because of the pandemic. But we've had the most ever named storms in the Atlantic, 29, making it only the second time in history that we've run out of names for tropical storms. The National Hurricane Center in Miami has had to resort to the Greek alphabet, which is what happens when that does happen. So that's a bit of trivia for you to store away for the festive period. We've also seen a record-breaking 12 storms make US landfall. And of course, Atlantic hurricanes do at times influence the weather here in the UK. Flooding has been a serious feature throughout the world again this year, but if I just look at October and November so far, well, record-breaking floods in Vietnam, China, Brazil, and the Republic of Congo have claimed over 1,000 lives and displaced tens of thousands from their homes, just really in the past 6-7 weeks. And even if we think about weather a bit closer to home now in the UK and here in Scotland, who can forget the dry and sunny April and May that we had in lockdown? And let me tell you, there's lots of research going on into the fact that we had zero, practically, global aviation during that period. And therefore, cloud condensation nuclei, how clouds form, the aerosols in the atmosphere were down. And I think scientists will have some very interesting results to feed back on that in time. After that, of course, as lockdown eased, it was followed by a fairly unsettled summer with slightly above average rainfall. And then in the autumn months, some really, really wet weather. Indeed, on the 3rd of October, it's been the wettest day ever recorded across the whole of the UK, with enough rainfall to fill the whole of Loch Ness, or Lake Ness, as some of my former weather forecaster colleagues in England kept saying on the television, as they do. And of course, that had impacts on flooding here in Scotland as well. The Wresson Be Thankful being such a classic example of that, and the closure of that road. I'm actually a board member at Loch Lomond in the Trossachs National Park and see firsthand the impact that has on communities and also on businesses in that part of the world. And if I was to underline just one climate fact, one statistic that I'd like you to take home is this, that winter rainfall in the west of Scotland has increased by 70% in less than 60 years. And that's really unprecedented rate of change, which I think resonates with what Doug Allen was talking to us about yesterday and climate breakdown. I mean, that really is unprecedented. And you may have noticed last week a report from the Institute of Civil Engineers in Scotland and a news release where they highlighted that our road, rail and bridge network was never designed for this amount of rain, and calling for proper upgrades, which in the long run will save money and will definitely save lives. And I think it's also opened our eyes to different ways of travelling. I know e-bikes were mentioned by Neil from Greenhive yesterday in our members session, and we also have Cycling Scotland and many of our members here showcasing some of the work they're doing on active travel. And I think that's going to be increasingly important as we deal with how our climate in Scotland is changing. So what are we doing about it? Well, globally, it's the Paris Agreement that's back in the frame, thanks to the US election. And as you know, at COP21, 197 countries signed an agreement to pursue efforts to limit emissions and therefore temperature rise, ideally to below or 1.5 degrees by the end of the century, and that's above the pre-industrial levels that we had in 1850 to 1900. But a degree of that's already gone, and I think, as was mentioned a couple of times yesterday, that gives us a very, very restricted amount to play with, so to speak. And I think what's a constant source of frustration to many of us in this area, and scientists and economists now frequently pointing out that preventing climate change is actually cheaper than dealing with the damage. But I'd like to finish on a slightly more optimistic note when I'm talking about a greener world, climate change, climate emergency globally and here in Scotland. And that is that in Scotland, we are now generating over 90% of our electricity from renewable sources. I think the Scottish Government target for 2020 was 100%, but we are incredibly close to that. We'll find out towards the end of the year. And of course, we were the first country in the world to have a Climate Change Act. And as Martin mentioned in his speech yesterday, when he was talking about the Paris Agreement and talking about it in Scotland, you know, we are world leading in lots of different areas. And that's a good thing. And it's something, obviously, we really want to build on for COP26. And I know as well from dealing firsthand with schools, colleges and universities, we have an incredibly knowledgeable and engaged young population as well, which is a really, really good thing. And I know younger population is truly desperate for organisations to step up. And I think from what we've seen yesterday and our programme today, I know that CRNS is one of those organisations. And at this conference, I think we're also seeing how members and partner organisations are also stepping up, are leading the way as we strive to address the climate emergency and our green recovery. So I'd just like to thank you for that and say that it's much appreciated, and that I, for one, will continue to support and to raise awareness about the brilliant job that CRNS and all of the members are doing. So thank you. And now I'd like to introduce somebody who is truly inspiring. Our first speaker is going to add an international flavour to our conference this morning. Terry McDonald is the entrepreneurial-minded Executive Director of the St. Vincent de Paul Society of Lane County, Oregon, in the USA. He's been recognised locally, regionally and nationally for innovations not just in reuse and recycling enterprises, but also for programmes that serve the disenfranchised across Oregon. Terry's passion is creating avenues out of poverty through finding new uses for consumers' useless discards, creating new strategies and community coalitions to deal with old problems, and giving low-income and homeless people a chance to reclaim their dignity through employment and self-sufficiency. He also oversees the Cascade Alliance. That's a national network of non-profit organisations developing socially responsible diversion of usable materials from the waste stream. So I know that's something that many members will be interested in and work so well in as well. And that project to date has created hundreds of sustainable jobs, annually diverts millions of pounds of materials and generates millions in annual revenue that really add resilience to those non-profit agencies, allowing them to better serve the needs of their communities. So let's now listen and learn from Mr. Terry McDonald.
Good day. I'm Terry McDonald. I'm the director of St. Vincent de Paul Society of Lane County in Eugene, Oregon, in the United States. And I think I know a fair number of the people that are in attendance of this meeting, since I've been visiting you for the last 17 years, picking up some of your old brown furniture. 2003, Pauline Hinchon and Lindsay Chalmers contacted me from Rags and indicated that they were interested in studying how we were doing mattress recycling in the United States. I happened to be making a visit over to the United Kingdom at that point. We visited, and then somewhat later, they invited me to come up and do a presentation to CRNS. At that presentation, I had a chance to visit some of your local nonprofits, and as a result of that, discovered that your brown furniture, which was not particularly desirable in your marketplace, was very desirable in my marketplace. And since that time, almost 20 years ago, we've imported from your various nonprofits in Scotland over 150 cargo containers of brown furniture, about 450 tons, all of which has gone into my retail thrift stores or else donations to the public, and they're a very great asset to us, and also some economic opportunity for the nonprofits over in Scotland today. So the result of that collaboration has led us to visiting many times over the years. Now, of course, today we're in a very different world than we were so many years ago. The difference now, of course, is COVID-19 and the various other disasters that have occurred in my part of the world, which is somewhat unique from yours. Those are the large wildfires that we've had in this immediate area. So let me talk a little bit about the effect of COVID-19 on our business and our business model. And then I will talk about the effect of fires that have been roaring through our area. Over 1 million acres of Oregon has burned in the last 2 months. And then I'd like to finish by talking about the effect or the need for developing more of a circular economy for both us and for you. It's a matter of fact, it's not just you or I, it's actually the entire world. So COVID-19 really began affecting the state of Oregon in mid-March. And at that point, the governor asked that we shut down businesses. And as a result of that, St. Vincent de Paul had to shut down its 15 stores, its processing and so forth, laying off about 300 individuals. At the same time, we recognized that the needs for the homeless community, which is quite significant in this area, needed to be addressed as it was still early spring. And as you know, like in Scotland, early spring is not necessarily a good time for a homeless person to be outside. So we pivoted immediately on March 16th to work with the local county government and the local councils to go ahead and set up emergency respite centers, but under COVID-19 rules, which meant that there had to be at least 12 feet separation between the people that were staying in the emergency shelters. As a result of setting up several of these particular facilities throughout the area, we were able to house over 400 individuals that would have been inside of a warm and dry place, and also do the necessary checking to make sure that they did not have COVID-19 and that their health needs were being met. Increasingly, we're seeing that as a theme across the board. The need for homeless services has grown quite dramatically in this part of the world. At the same time, the need for social distancing has become very important. As you know, and as we know, when the effect of going back to school for the universities and at the high schools and the primary schools for children has led to a number of hotspots. And so as a result of that, we're now seeing a spike up of coronavirus. Now, we have had the opportunity to reopen many of our stores, although not all. So we're down from 15 stores to 13 stores at this point. And some of our other programs, of course, were affected as well. But several of the recycling programs have actually grown in scale. And that's because we're recognizing the need for a more circular economy across the board. And what do we mean by that circular economy? Well, really what we mean is we need to have very smart housing. We need to have much less carbon footprint associated with what we do and what the community does. And we definitely need to find ways to recycle oddball things that just don't normally recycle well. So as you know, or you may know, we've been recycling mattresses for 20 years. During that period of time, we've recycled well over 2.5 million mattresses and saved those from going into landfills throughout this region. Just this last month, we processed about 35,000 mattresses. If you were to think about those in terms of linear feet, that would be about 40 miles of mattresses lengths, basically set end to end, that we recycled this last month. It's a very important feature, and it's one that we're seeing increasingly adopted around the United States, and that is the model of the European product stewardship. And product stewardship is something that we're going to be suggesting for the state of Oregon for mattresses as we speak, coming up in January of this next year, as well as carpet recycling. So our need to divert from the waste stream really is being driven by a couple of things. One, obviously, the environmental footprint needs to be dropped down. Second, reuse really is the best use, finding a way to get these products out of the waste stream, and even if their components are used and not the product itself, finding a way to get those components back into another product. So in the case of mattresses, about 70% of a mattress can be recycled into some other product, whether it's carpet pad or mulch or soil amendments for the wood, or steel back into the steel industry, all of which can be helpful for our environment. We're also very aggressive now on taking back polystyrene. Polystyrene generally really causes a problem in the, since it's so light and takes up so much room in the landfill, that we're the largest processor of polystyrene in this region. We do about 2 tons of that per month. It's hard to imagine how much 2 tons of extruded polystyrene looks like, but it fills up lots of containers. But we densify it down by a hot melt process, which then reduces it down to 1/50th of its previous size. The result is that polystyrene is 100% recyclable. It goes back and is remanufactured and re-extruded and can be the good packing material that it is today. It's relatively neutral. We're looking for other opportunities. So in our affordable housing projects that we are developing, we're increasingly not looking at just good envelopes, but we're also looking at more photovoltaic and storage of energy and resilient buildings. We live in a subduction zone. It's very geologically active. There is concern at some point over the next 100 years or so, there will be an extremely powerful earthquake. And when that happens, most of the infrastructure of this region is going to be destroyed. So by having resilient community buildings, buildings that are built to earthquake resistant standards with their own separate energy, will be helpful for helping our neighborhoods recover from such a disaster. Now, the fires that we've had in the last months are truly a good indicator of what's going on in global warming. Definitely, our forests are beginning to change. Not only are they dying, the species migration is going forward, but in addition to that, the catastrophic fires that we've seen in the last 2 months really do make a difference in our lives. So for 10 days, we were under a fire watch where the fires actually spread within about 3 miles of my office where I'm sitting right now. One of my apartment complexes for low-income people had to be evacuated. Many of my staff had to be evacuated as well. Some of them lost their housing. What we're trying to work with is the county and the cities in this area to recover from this. The fires are still burning, by the way. They will probably finally go out somewhere in the next month or so. But the truth is that finding a way to design our housing and infrastructure in a way that we can avoid these catastrophic fires is very, very important. So from our point of view, we know that we have to change the way we live and how we interface with the nature around us. Oregon is a very bucolic state, it's a very pretty state, but we have not done the necessary forest management practices. And of course, the effect of climate change definitely is changing the species that live in our forests. So the result of that is that we're working with the universities to plan for the future of how we're going to have our forests look into the future. There will be different species. Instead of being coniferous fir, it's probably going to be mixed forests. And as a result of that, it's going to change what we do economically, since we're a very timber dependent area. But by working together, by working with our county and city officials and the public, finding a way to better have our environment maintained and succeeding is what we're really trying to do. Our hope also is to continue the partnerships we see around the world, in Scotland in particular. We've enjoyed the opportunity to work with your zero waste groups. We've enjoyed the opportunity to share thoughts and ideas. One of the things that we're working on a lot right now is corporate partnerships, so that we'll be able to take the large amount of corporate waste material out of the waste streams and find other markets for it. Currently, we receive about 4 or 5 containers per week of that type of material from various for-profit companies around the United States that send product to us. That kind of partnership, I think, is something that both of us could merit from, the United States and Scotland. I also look at Scotland as one of those places where innovation really does happen. So I do watch it pretty carefully. If this COVID-19 ever lets up again, which I hope it does, the opportunity to travel over to Scotland and see your lovely country is one of my top priorities. In the meantime, let us find a way to work together to make a greener and better planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. That was a wonderful presentation, and I'm sure you know you'll be warmly welcomed here in Scotland, just actually judging by some of the comments in the chat bar, and how you gave us a tremendous insight into social enterprise responding to crisis, be that COVID, climate, right on your doorstep, and of course geological events as well, and a great insight into how to balance that raising of awareness that's happened during the pandemic about some of the green important issues, and how to balance that while still recovering from COVID. So thank you very much to Terry McDonald, a great friend of Scotland, and Terry's organisation website has been posted. A link to that has been posted in the chat box as well, if you want to find out a little bit more. Now, moving on with our programme this morning, we have 2 speakers for you, followed by a question and answer session. So firstly, let me introduce someone you all know well, Iain Gulland, who is Chief Executive of Zero Waste Scotland. And Iain, as you know, is the founding CEO of Zero Waste Scotland, having previously worked on initiating recycling systems in the public, private and third sectors, and led the Community Recycling Network Scotland until 2008. Iain has recently been appointed President of the Association of Cities and Regions for Resource Management, and is a member of several Scottish Government programme boards, including those covering low carbon and manufacturing. He's here today to talk to us about lessons from lockdown on building a greener, fairer Scotland. So I'm going to hand over to Iain Gulland. Yep, I think we've got a slight connection issue there with Iain, so I'm just going to let our technology gurus work on that while I reflect a little bit more on what Terry said, just to see if we can sort that out. Again, in the chat box, and there's been some great feedback on that about how Terry's always leading on action and ideas. Lucky enough to have the chance to visit Terry's projects in 2007, Ray there, inspirational, and indeed I think it's so important, because that's been such a backbone, I think, of CRNS's work, is that partnership, working not just across Scotland and indeed the UK, but internationally as well, and learning from some of those best practices that we have internationally as well. So I think we are able to go to Iain now. We've sorted out any little gremlins. Just blame No, I think, do you know what? I think the weather, I'm just going to blame the weather. We're going to leave Iain and go to our second speaker, actually. So let me just briefly introduce our second speaker, who you'll see from the programme is Libby Peak, and she is Head of Resource Policy at the Green Alliance, leading project work on resource efficiency and the circular economy. And Libby previously spent 10 years actually as an editor at Resource Media, which many of you will know, an environmental publishing and communications company aiming to lead discussions around sustainability and resource use. Libby edited several magazines, worked on projects that led to expertise in marine plastics, recycling, food waste and the sharing economy. And she's here today to talk to us about how can the circular economy contribute to a greener recovery. So it's over, I hope, to Libby Peak.
Thanks very much. As we've just said, my name is Libby Peak and I'm Head of Resource Policy at Green Alliance. For those of you who don't know us, Green Alliance is a charity and think tank that focuses on achieving ambitious leadership for the environment. And today I'm going to talk about how the circular economy can contribute to a green recovery, which I think is a really important question. And obviously this morning down here in London, we've had the Prime Minister announce his plans for a green recovery, a 10-point plan. And it does have a lot of the things that the environment sector and Green Alliance has been calling for, specifically things around petrol and diesel vehicle phase-outs and whatnot, but it doesn't yet have anything about the circular economy in it. I think one of the most useful things about that, the release, the statement that they put out this morning, was that the final sentence said that this was just the start of the process and that they'll be revisiting things and thinking more about what needs to be done to have a green recovery to end the UK's contribution to climate change. And so we're going to be continuing to push for the idea of circular economy at the UK level. We'll push in Scotland as well. I think that Scotland is quite a bit farther advanced than some people in England in terms of grasping the potential of the circular economy. And some of the reasons that we're going to be promoting the circular economy are summarised in this presentation today. So I'm not going to dwell on this first slide, which is a conceptual representation of the circular economy. I'm sure all of you are very familiar with it, but I do like to put it up at the start of any presentations on the circular economy, just to sort of focus minds on what's the most important thing about the circular economy, because the outer loops, the ones that are open loop recycling, closed loop recycling, those are part of the circular economy, but the fact that they're on the outside means that they're the last things that we should be focusing on. They're the ones that maintain some value, some materials, but they don't maintain anywhere near as much value as things like repair, remanufacture and reuse, which are the central ones. And obviously you all know that very well. I also like to envisage this this concept with a bullseye of reduction in the middle. I think that's what we're ultimately aiming for, using fewer resources, and reuse and repair have a real role to play in that. Moving on. So we've done lots of research at Green Alliance about the circular economy, and we, I think, have a really good narrative about why we need to be focusing on it a lot more. And so some of the benefits of the circular economy are summarized in this presentation, the first of which is jobs. And the circular economy, in terms of the jobs potential that it offers, we did some research with RAP for the whole of the UK, which found that a transformational approach to the circular economy, which concentrated a lot on remanufacturing, on servitization, so selling services instead of products, as well as on those outer loops of high value closed loop recycling and low value open loop recycling. Altogether, those jobs offer a potential for more than 500,000 jobs in the UK. And at the time we did the research, which is a while ago now, it was in 2015, over 100,000 of those were net jobs to the economy. And obviously with the situation that we're facing now, with unemployment growing because of coronavirus, we'd expect that a higher proportion of those would be net jobs to the economy. So it does offer quite a lot in terms of the UK as a whole. And we also did some subsequent research that focused in specifically on Scotland and what sort of job opportunities there were for Scotland if we went for a much more transformational scenario. And the one that I'm going to focus on in this slide is scenario 3, which is the transformation. So it assumed that by 2050 we could really ramp things up, and that you'd have 85% recycling rate, which is still some way off. You'd have an increase in 39% in remanufacturing, and Scotland does have quite a good base for remanufacturing, and you'd have a growth in reuse of 25%, and then significant growth in servitization and in biorefining. And that analysis showed that in scenario 3, the one on the right there, you could add 43,000 growth jobs to Scotland's labour force, and the highest proportion of those are in Glasgow. But they are these sorts of jobs in reuse and remanufacture, especially in reuse, as I'm sure you all know. They are necessarily distributed around the country where there are centres of population. Because people will want to repair their products and reuse their products on a local level. So it is a really good job, a really good way to boost the local labour force. And it's definitely not the only positive of the circular economy. One of the other benefits that we've quantified is productivity, for manufacturers in particular. And there's research from the Institute of Manufacturing, I believe, which found that the cost to a typical UK manufacturer, only 10% of their costs go on labour. Actually, 50% go on resource costs, which includes the materials that they use and the energy that they use as well. And so we believe that we haven't yet grasped the concept that there's a lot more scope to raise productivity if you're focusing on resource use, rather than just focusing on labour and driving down those labour costs. And the Institute for Manufacturing quantified actually that the UK manufacturers could boost their profits by £10 billion if they raised their level of resource efficiency to the level of the highest. Another benefit of the circular economy is that it can add resilience to the economy, to our security of resource supplies. And I think that after a long time of not really being a matter of focus for a lot of companies and for the government, the idea of resource security is really gaining traction in light of the shock of coronavirus and the impact, the frailty that it highlighted in a lot of supply chains. And the piles of little things that you see there, those are rare earth elements, and rare earth elements are absolutely vital to loads of things, including electronic devices, including electric vehicles, and low carbon infrastructure that we're going to need in order to have a low carbon economy in the future. And at the moment, the UK is 100% reliant on imports for these sorts of materials, and then we lose 100% of them in the recycling or waste process. And this is definitely a problem for things like electronics, but for things like wind turbines, it is even more of a problem. And at the moment, we haven't necessarily learned the lessons in terms of the oil rigs and decommissioning there. And we're putting up wind turbines without really thinking about how we can treat them at end of life to preserve those vital materials that are in them. And we've done some analysis that suggests that if we had a really ambitious approach to reusing and recycling rare earth elements and cobalts, we could meet a significant portion of the demand that we'll need by 2030 and 2050 in order to keep powering those and implementing new low carbon technologies. The next benefit of the circular economy is that it really reduces carbon. And this is a message that we've been pushing a lot lately, along with the Centre for Industrial Energy Materials and Products. We've been quantifying the carbon savings that can be had through more resource efficiency. And by that, we were measuring both what goes in, so using and losing fewer resources in the production process, and then ensuring that we get the most out of products by using them for as long as possible, and then reusing them or remanufacturing or recycling them at the end of the process. And quantifying those benefits was quite eye-opening, because you can see at the bottom line there, it's possibly a bit faint, but that's the resource efficiency potential. So we looked at just 5 key sectors. We looked at construction, appliances, vehicles, food, and textiles. And from those 5 key sectors, if we did just a bit of resource efficiency on either side of the production and use cycle, the carbon benefits through to the end of the fifth carbon budget were actually bigger than a lot of the other things that have been tried, like including the building regulations, which are a really big policy to reduce carbon. And something that's really good that's come out of this research is that the CCC is preparing its advice on the sixth carbon budget, and it will be starting to look at resource efficiency and making recommendations around that. So we're really hopeful that governments grasp the connection between resource use and carbon emissions, and start treating resource efficiency and the circular economy as not just something that's about reducing waste, but something that's really about reducing carbon as well. Another benefit of the circular economy, and I'm sure that the reuse people out there are very familiar with this one, is satisfaction. People in the UK, well, in the first instance, we do produce a lot of e-waste, for instance. We have the second highest rate of e-waste generation in the world after Norway, which I found quite shocking, because it means that we produce more e-waste in the UK than places like the US and China. And I suspect that a lot of that is down to the fact that the products aren't built to last, and also that there's more of a tendency in the UK to look at the initial price of some electronic devices and to buy cheap and buy often. But that has a knock-on effect of frustrating people, and we've found that 65% of people often feel frustrated about how long products last. And it's not on this slide, but actually 81% of people, I believe, want government to do something about it, to set more regulations for businesses to manufacture products that do last. And as it happens, we've just put out another report which is on eco-design, and we believe that the government does have the tools it needs to set standards to make sure that products last as long as people expect, and also that they're more repairable. So that when they do break, as inevitably they will, it'll be easier for people to get them repaired, repair them themselves, take them to professional repairers, or go to community repair networks to get that done. So with all these benefits, I suppose the question is, why on earth aren't we doing it? Why haven't we yet instituted a circular economy? The economies around the world are probably less than 10% circular by lots of different measurements. And I suppose there are a few reasons. The main one is just inertia, the linear economy, where we take materials out of the ground, make products out of them, use them very briefly, and then in lots of instances return them to the ground or send them up in smoke. That's been developed for quite a long time, and it's highly efficient. And so switching away from that is clearly quite a large task. I'd say that the other main concern I've got is that certainly at a Westminster level, there is a continuing focus on end of life when we're thinking about resource use. The department that has the responsibility for the circular economy looks at it from the lens of producing less waste, and not necessarily from the lens of designing things in the right instance to design out waste. And so there's a focus on the end of life, and there's a lack of join up amongst government departments and across the material cycles. I think that people are realizing a lot more that this is a problem, and so are trying to put the measures in place in order to address that. But it's quite a hard nut to crack, it seems. And then the final one, which I'll touch on just briefly, is that we have the wrong infrastructure. The infrastructure that we've got has been designed for a linear economy, the landfills, the energy from waste infrastructures, and it now is having the effect that it's perpetuating the linear economy. And so we do need a completely different sort of approach to infrastructure. First of all, to track the sort of infrastructure that we have, which isn't tracked very efficiently at the moment, and then to create a real plan and a concept of what sort of infrastructure we want, and create a plan for how to get there. And we've done some research for some household waste streams in England, and I'm just going to touch on that for the moment. We looked at household electronics as well as for household plastics and household textiles, and looked at the infrastructure that's currently available in the UK. And compared it to what is needed, and how much of it is circular and how much is linear. And it's probably quite small, this slide, but the green bits at the top, that would be the circular economy infrastructure, and the ones at the bottom, that's the linear economy. And so for household electronics, we have got quite a lot of capacity to recycle. This is the business as usual scenario. We've got a lot of capacity to do low quality recycling for household electronics when they eventually reach their end of life, which is kind of technically circular economy, but it's not the ideal sort of circular economy that you'd want, because it relies on shredding, and a lot of the value, or nearly all of the value of the product, will be lost through that, and you won't be able to reuse parts, and you won't be able to reuse whole products. So we also modeled a couple other scenarios through to 2030, looking at what we might achieve if we focused on high recycling and what we would achieve if we went for a transformational scenario. And the transformational scenario over on the right-hand side is the one that we really want to be aiming for. And that scenario envisages that we'd reduce the amount of electronic waste that we produce in the UK by half, and we do that through a completely new approach to infrastructure. So that would require a lot more in terms of logistics, in terms of business models that enable people to keep their products in use for as long as possible. The sort of servitization that I mentioned earlier, where businesses potentially sell services rather than just selling products, and so have incentive to keep them in really good repair for as long as possible. And so we've suggested that in that scenario, virtually all of the infrastructure that we've got at the moment isn't suitable for that. We do need to overhaul the infrastructure and ensure that we have dedicated high quality recycling, as well as those methods for reusing, and the logistics for ensuring that products don't become waste in the first instance. And so I'm just going to finish on a few of our top recommendations for the circular economy. We have lots of research and recommendations on circular economy, so I'd encourage you to take a look at our website and or get in touch if you want to know more. But some of the top things that we've been calling for is, first of all, to establish resource efficiency partnerships. So these would be sector-led partnerships that look at how we can make sure that businesses are learning from each other, that those sectors that face particular challenges when it comes to resource efficiency, like construction, can set benchmarks for best practice, and then potentially have targets for their sectors to ensure that they're using resources as efficiently as possible. The second one, and I think this is the one that is probably most popular with the public and would be most helpful to the reuse networks, would be to legislate for better products so that they're durable and repairable, and that people have a right to repair and an access to the sort of repair information that they need in order to keep products in use for as long as possible. As I've said, we definitely need to improve the data that we've got on both waste and on the infrastructure that we have to treat waste and to prevent waste. And then we've also called for funding for new business models. I think a lot of the research, a lot of the funding for circular economy so far has been at a research and innovation level, but we do definitely need those business models to be embedded. And I would say that, again, Scotland is probably ahead of a lot of the rest of the UK on this. And then the final one is to use appropriate fiscal incentives. We've got a new project that's looking at how the tax system could be used to ensure most people are consuming fewer goods, they have better quality goods, and that there's a low carbon economy. And so, excuse me, we've called recently for a change to the VAT system, which is not something that Scotland could do on its own, but that could potentially be something that Scotland's calling for, to ensure that repair businesses don't necessarily have to pay VAT, because I think at the moment one of the biggest barriers to repair is that there's a lack of affordable services. And so because of Brexit, actually, we'll have more leniency in how we apply that in the future. And so we've called for a Brexit boost for the repair industry. Under EU rules, you can reduce VAT to 6% on some labour-intensive repair activities. But if we do leave the VAT rules, which isn't certain yet, but if we do leave them, we could zero rate them. And I think that would provide a big boost to a lot of businesses who suffer because they're labour intensive. And that is all from me. So if you are interested in learning more, please do feel free to get in touch and continue the conversation.
Thank you very much indeed, Libby, and Libby will be with us for a Q&A shortly. And I think just looking again at some of the comments coming through, your data is incredibly valuable to our Scottish members there, and alongside your UK Westminster perspective, and that has been most helpful and really appreciated. And there are some questions coming through which we will take after we've had our second presentation. So Libby is sticking with us, but I also believe we now have Iain all remotely linked up. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to the Chief Executive of Zero Waste Scotland, Iain Gulland.
Okay, thank you, Heather. Thanks for your patience there. Hopefully everybody can hear and see me. Thanks indeed to the IT team, Richard, getting us back on. So there was a moment there I didn't think I was going to make it, but certainly I'm here now. So great to be here. Great to be able to present to the CRNS conference live, virtually live, but very much here. And thanks to Libby for stepping in there. I mean, to be fair, when I saw I was following Terry McDonald, I thought, wow, what an act to follow. And years gone by, I actually did a bit of a tour down under in Australia and New Zealand with Terry and a few others, and I was always the person who followed Terry on stage, and I found it really quite challenging because, as obviously those who have heard him speak before and those that have heard him for the first time, what a powerful story he can really articulate around the resource economy, how you're taking resources from what was basically the waste stream and making real economic and social as well as environmental value from them. I mean, it is. I've had the privilege of being out in Oregon to see his set up there, and it is something to behold. And the other thing which I labour the point quite often, and I'll probably mention again in this presentation, the fact that it's so people-centred. It is about people. It's not just employees; it's the people that he works with and interfaces with, and ultimately supports in his community, which really makes that such a special project. An initiative over in Oregon and now spreading not just across America but around the world as well. So well done. So yeah, thanks Libby for stepping in. I couldn't tell a better story than both Libby's and Terry. So I'll skip through a few things. I think it probably is important to get to the questions and get a bit of a dialogue going. I was asked to kind of reflect on some of the perhaps impacts of COVID and the pandemic. I think, to some extent, the strapline everybody uses is everything has changed, but at the same essence, nothing has changed. We still have inequalities around the world, even here in Scotland. We still have poverty. We still have people using food banks. The big emitters of carbon are still the big emitters of carbon. We here in Scotland still consume, our carbon footprint, 4/5 of our carbon footprint is basically from the consumption of products and materials, half of which are actually from outside of Scotland. So the impact of our unsustainable lifestyle is not just impacts here in Scotland, but globally as well. We do need to start to seriously think about how we reduce our demand for resources, virgin resources. But having said that, there are the same opportunities. So I know I've been involved in community recycling for a number of years now, and even at Zero Waste Scotland take a keen interest in what's happening. So I still see very much some of those opportunities that we've had in years gone by are still very relevant today. I think the transformation is even more required and is to some extent more within our grasp. And if you listen to some of the conversations that are already ongoing around the need for not just a green recovery but a circular recovery in terms of bringing the circular economy much to the fore, is clearly really emphasising the need for us to change tact and change tact quickly, and as Libby said, really embrace the circular economy. I guess what the pandemic has shown us, though, is that we can do things differently. We're all, as individual citizens and as communities and even as businesses, we've all had to do things differently, whether that's working from home or changing our business model to go online, more online. And clearly there was great emphasis of some of the manufacturing businesses, particularly even the whiskey industry and the beer industry, sort of like changing production to make hand sanitizer for the NHS. We've had car manufacturers making ventilators for the NHS. We've had a huge change, as I said, in some businesses, and I know that a lot of the community organisations have changed what they've been doing. A lot of furniture projects have got into the distribution of food to support their communities, particularly at the early stages of lockdown. So that inventiveness, I think, is the kind of hallmark of what we're going to require for the circular economy and for tackling climate change. So it's clear that, in our response to COVID, we've got that. We've got that in our DNA, and we can do it. So that's huge encouragement. The fact that it is another global issue, so pandemic's a global issue, climate change is a global issue, and the fact that it does require all of us individually to kind of step up and perhaps do small things, but all of those small things actually, do amount to a big change in the way that we address climate change. And ultimately, these actions are most significant because we will struggle to influence the bigger picture, but our small actions in a collective, both in our own communities and here in Scotland, will resonate around the world. So I think clearly the circular economy has come more into the fore around, some issues around supply chain resilience. I know a lot of government people are very keen on this now, in terms of what's happened during COVID, but also about jobs, jobs in the community. And I'm always a great believer to stress the point that the circular economy is a distributive economy. It's about how do we, deal with resources in a local situation and, as again, people-centred. That's where the real value is. So this is not about, sucking all the materials out of Scotland into the central belt and creating big factories to reprocess the materials. The circular economy really works, as Libby said, through repair, remanufacturing, repurposing, refurbishment of goods in a locality, so they can be reused again and again. And that's the key thing for me, is how can we actually, make sure that we do this circular economy in a way that is actually distributive, and it benefits all across Scotland. My 4 points I was going to just like to emphasise and then sort of open up the conversation, where I think there are real opportunities for community resource members in Scotland. Clearly reuse, so number 1 is reuse, developing the reuse infrastructure. So my plea would be for the sector to think big, think collectively as well. We need to see things like tool libraries, reuse shops, etc., the remakery idea, where people can get things repaired. We need to see them on every, high street in Scotland. We need to see them in every community. We need greater accessibility for people. That's what people are looking for, as Libby pointed out. There's a greater demand for people to look for repair. We need to see it more on the mainstream, and clearly as Zero Waste Scotland, we've been really happy to support a number of those organisations, and particularly in these challenging times around coming out of COVID or dealing with COVID crisis. We've been supporting the shops on the ground, the Revolve members on the ground, facilitating the reopening of many of those facilities in a safe environment for both the staff and customers. There's clearly other opportunities around the way that we're all working at home. So questions about the future of offices. So is there an opportunity there for the refurbishment on a scale, refurbishment of desks and office equipment? There's obviously, people are much more interested in leasing models. I know we've been supporting a couple of projects on, the idea of leasing bikes. So everybody's getting very interested in cycling again, which is great. But opportunities for both electric bikes and mechanical bikes. Is there an opportunity there for leasing models to get more people back onto bikes? And I know that there's an organisation called Stitch the Gap, which is actually looking at leasing sewing machines, again getting people interested in repair at home, but again without the kind of big outlay for expensive sewing machines and equipment. Could that get leased? So, and we've already had the reuse consortium, so where you've seen CRNS members come together. I think building on what Terry talked about in terms of that Cascade Alliance in America, I think there's a lot more that we would like to support as Zero Waste Scotland, that how we could support members of the CRNS working more collaboratively together on some of these big opportunities, and certainly we have not just us, but there's other parts of government with funding to really support not just individual initiatives, but initiatives that want to scale up and clearly pilot new ideas. As Terry said, innovation is one, again, a real hallmark of what happens in the sector here in Scotland. So we'd be obviously keen to support that. The second thing, and others have talked about it, is this collaboration. The circular economy really does resonate where we see lots of different partners coming together and potential partners that don't usually work together. So from different sectors who will come together, whether that's to create a new business opportunity or actually just to reorientate what they're already doing in a different way to support local action. And I think there's a key role for community organisations to seek those partners out, and it's great to see that list of sponsors along the bottom. When you see quite a lot of other private sector organisations as well, really keen to work with CRNS members on the ground. And I know from the conversations I have that's a key ask of a lot of the businesses that we interact with, who are looking for partners on the ground, embedded in communities, who can help and support and actually take a share of the economic and social opportunities that are happening. So whether that's through things like vertical farming, insect farming, which is again a topical issue for us at Zero Waste Scotland, and we're running some events to look at that. Next week, even distribution of clothing or clothing rental for clothing. A lot of those big companies or more established companies have got real ideas in these areas, but are looking for partners who have access to the distributive economy that we're talking about in terms of providing interfaces with local communities. I've already mentioned cycling as well. Even the deposit return system, we've talked a lot about that over the years, that clearly it's something that is going to happen now in Scotland, but there is a huge opportunity for local partnerships to be formed with the scheme administrator, which will be established by the producers in due course. But again, their success will rely on the individual interactions and communities with customers and the reverse logistics and even the education and awareness raising. So all of those opportunities around the circular economy, I believe there are clear avenues for the community sector to get involved. I think the other two things I'd probably stress is is around engagement. We talk a lot about green jobs and we talk a lot about climate activism. And these are things that the community sector is very strong on. But if we're going to achieve what we need to achieve in terms of addressing climate change, particularly over the next 10 years, we actually need a green society. We need everybody in society, regardless of what their job is, whether they're a nurse, whether they're a school teacher, whether they're a hairdresser. They all need to be aware of not just the challenges of climate change, as Heather sketched out at the beginning, but actually what we need to be doing differently to solve that crisis. So we need to embed awareness in everyone in our communities, and I think there's a key role, not just through the formal settings of engagement at schools, in colleges and universities, but in reaching out into communities, even some of the harder to reach communities or individuals, to ensure that they are as aware of not just the challenges but the opportunities to do things differently. And I think that's something that in the work that you do, you're clearly doing that already, but we do need to raise that. All of us need to raise that bar and really see ourselves as part of the engagement infrastructure. Final thing I'd probably just echo what others have said is really about leadership, and there's a big bit about demonstrating the art of the possible. I think one of the big challenges around climate change is that everybody sees the targets and everybody talks about life being different when we achieve that net zero, both in terms of transport and the way that we work and the way that we go about our business. But people struggle to imagine what that actually is like, and that's always a barrier when you're in a kind of change process. You need to really start to paint the picture of what the future will look like by 2030 and by 2045. And actually, what the community sector is already doing to a great extent is what the future should and could look like. So I think there's a real opportunity for the sector to kind of shout louder, sing out not just locally but nationally, about the work that you're doing and the opportunities that each of those individual initiatives have, if they could be replicated, if they could be scaled up and embedded in every community in Scotland. I think there's a real leadership opportunity, whether that's through the CRNS or through the collective membership, to demonstrate that, you know, the world, you know, what the world needs to move to is actually quite exciting, and it's, as I said, is very much people focused. And also that, you know, that idea of piloting and innovating is a clear ask for all of us. We don't all have the answers. I mean, clearly we have some of the answers in front of us, but we need to innovate, constantly innovate. And that's just, you know, going back to a point that Libby was talking about, even just thinking about fiscal instruments, different policies that could be brought to play here in Scotland. Some of them might be what your members have seen from other parts of the world or other parts of Europe, and to challenge both people like myself, but probably more importantly, ministers and government officials, that there is a different way of doing things in terms of fiscal and legislative policies, which will accelerate a lot of the work that you do. So I'll leave it there, because I really would be interested in answering a few questions. So apologies for the technical hiccup earlier, but thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Iain. That was a fantastic reflection, really, on the parallels and crossovers between COVID recovery here in Scotland and also the climate emergency. And Iain and Libby, I think, are going to join us now by the wonders of technology for our question and answer session. And there have been quite a few questions coming in. I think, are Libby and Iain there? I'm
yes.
Just looking at, here we go, fantastic, yes, thank you both very much again, and yes, Libby, thanks so much for bailing us out there while we just sorted the technology. In fact, could I start with a quick question to you, Libby, and I'm sure Iain will come in on it as well, but I noticed when you were finishing that Claire Downey came in with a question about how you find policymakers buying into the data that you've been presented, which has been really well received and resonates with our members. But they're also, I think, aware that you know, they are a converted audience and are interested in how you feel about whether policymakers are sufficiently persuaded by the data and where we're at with that.
I think some of them are. I'd say certainly a lot of the civil servants that work on resources and the circular economy definitely understand the narrative and grasp that. I'd say that there are some unfortunate situations in which they're not necessarily able to then usher in marshal the money so that they're able to make the changes that we want to see. As I was saying, there is sometimes quite an unhelpful divide between those policymakers that work on the waste side of things and those that work on the production side of things. And certainly at a Westminster level, you've had a lot more buy-in for circular economy concepts from DEFRA and not necessarily yet from BEIS, but I do think that that's changing. Certainly in part because BEIS is in charge of the carbon budgets, and we've been quite strong in pushing for the fact that actually resource efficiency of circular economy, that's a climate policy. It's not just about waste, and it should be much more at the forefront when people are designing and producing materials. So I wouldn't say we're there yet, but we're making steps, and the CCC's intervention in this is certainly going to be very useful.
Thanks, Libby. Do you have any, briefly, Iain, any point to add on that?
Yes, I probably think we are further ahead in Scotland, possibly because we're a smaller country and the civil servants, so the policy people are much closer together. And I do think we have made that bridge out of the waste debate into other parts of the economy, particularly around the in terms of embracing the circular economy. I actually think that has significantly moved forward in the last eight to 9 months, and I'm not suggesting that just because of COVID, but I think the COVID situation has demonstrated, as I said, potential lack of resilience in some of the supply chains that we look at in Scotland, also in terms of the waste management infrastructure, the more traditional waste management infrastructure in terms of onward supply of materials. It has allowed people to take a different look at this. I certainly think because of the jobs angle that the circular economy brings, particularly, as I said, local jobs and distributive jobs across the economy more broadly, has alerted other parts of government to this. I also think the work that clearly the community groups are doing on the ground and supporting sort of local economies and interfacing with particularly local government has changed as well, or certainly has changed that dynamic. I'm in much more, watch my language here, but healthier conversations even with the cities as well as Highlands and Islands about the circular economy, because and the role of the community sector in engaging with citizens on the ground. So I do feel hugely positive at this moment in time coming out of it, that we've actually seen another shift, another step change in thinking and belief and engagement and ultimately ambition around embedding the circular economy in our net zero plans for the future, which is, I think only, it's great for us all, it's great for the sector as well.
Absolutely, and I think Libby's data on that was incredibly powerful, I think, around jobs. I've got a few more sort of specific questions that we could maybe just have some brief answers to, if that's possible, because I want to try and get through as many as possible. But a question has come through around what role you think reuse targets would have in a more circular economy. How would that help? Is it far away? What do you think, Libby, to you first?
I'd say if we're going to institute reuse targets, we first need to improve the monitoring of resource flows through the economy, because there are lots of success stories when it comes to reuse already. Things like electronics, there's a lot of secondhand markets for phones, things like clothing. I mean, we get through way too much clothing, but we actually reuse a high percentage of it. Based on the scant data that we have. So I'd say that in the first instance, we really need to start monitoring the flows of products to see what's being done at the moment, and then from there, see what could be possible and set targets from there. But I think with all of these targets, the first thing has to be a robust way to measure them before we can institute the target.
Totally. Iain?
Yeah. I mean, I think reuse targets would definitely be helpful, but we need to know what we're measuring. But I actually think we should, again, would say that, using carbon as a target or carbon as a kind of proxy here is much more beneficial, because ultimately, that impacts on reduction as well. We use the carbon metric. Zero Waste Scotland have developed this, world-leading carbon metric, which actually, if you use it correctly, both at a national level but actually at a local level, right, actually incentivize reuse, incentivize waste reduction. Because if you're going to reduce the carbon impacts of your waste in its totality, those are the two that absolutely, shifts the dial in terms of carbon reduction, not just recycling. And the work that we've done on that demonstrates that, it allows you to target not just specific materials but specific actions. So if that was much more embedded in people's thinking, that we're not using what I would call old school metrics like recycling metrics and percentage of waste arising and all that sort of stuff, we start to think specifically around carbon, specifically about social values and other things, then it will actually incentivize people to do more reuse and more reuse at a local level. And the thing about data, sorry, going back to the question, I think data is very important for policymakers, clearly. But one of the most important things, particularly for ministers, is storytelling. They love stories, and it goes back to my point about talking about what you're doing, shouting about what you're doing, telling more of those stories. Ministers love stories. They love to know what's happening on the ground, and they like, the good news stories, or the stories that are about engagement and wider, and actually bring in wider different policies into the same space. And I think, again, the community sector, the community sector story, full stop, is a great story. And I think, the more that you tell that story, both individually and collectively, the more you'll get traction.
Totally agree. That's always been my experience in science education as well, I think. So that's a very important point to make, Iain. I've got a question here from Joel Libby that he's made a couple of times here, so I better get to it. And that's what's your view on the role of tax rebalancing to support the circular economy? Do we need to lower taxes on labour and increase taxes on resources? Do you have a thought on that one?
Yeah, this is something that we're quite concerned at the moment and increasingly concerned about. I'd say that there's plenty of good evidence that the tax system isn't being used very efficiently to drive environmental benefits. And one of the key areas that it's hampering action potentially is in things like the circular economy. Because we focus on labour taxes, and circular economy is necessarily labour intensive in a lot of instances, that does prevent action from happening. And so that's why through our Transform Tax project, we're starting to look at different options. So there are a lot of people who are calling for carbon taxes, and that's something that's definitely going to be useful, but we don't think that that's the only thing that's needed, because that's not necessarily going to trickle through and influence how people behave. And we need to get people involved in this sort of work as well. And so using the tax system to send them the sort of price signals would be really useful. And that's why we said that one of the first things that we could do quite easily is to reduce VAT on things like repair services, because we know that the labour is very expensive, and the fact that you're being charged 20% for labour costs as well as for all of the resources that go into it and the products themselves, that adds a lot to something that's already got barriers for people to get to it. So we don't think that's the only thing. There are other things that you can look at, like material taxes and whatnot, which we're exploring. We don't have recommendations on those yet, but definitely there's a lot more potential there.
Thanks very much for that, Libby. And I'd like to just look at a couple of final questions for both of you that looks at the circular economy and achieving that in Scotland, really. So a question's come through from Stephen about, does the Scottish Government really get that now? It's perhaps once in a lifetime opportunity for the green economic recovery, looking at circular economy. And there was another question also about a timescale for that, I think, especially from you, Iain, here in Scotland. So I suppose it's about how realistic and what sort of timescale are we looking at? Do you think now is the opportunity, and that we have a certain amount of time to really engage and capture it? I'll start with you, Iain, and then we'll maybe come to Libby for some final thoughts on that sort of circular economy, achieving it timescale.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the targets the government have set are net zero by 2045, but it's actually 75% reduction by 2030, which, even by the mission of the Committee on Climate Change, is absolutely, a really, really challenging target. So we've got 10 years. The commitment from government is to basically stop Scotland's impact on climate change by 2045. And as I said, when you think of our territorial emissions, that's only half the story. Half of our impact on global climate change is from the materials and products. So we need to start tackling that in parallel. And I think that's the real significant step change that we're seeing now, that people are now beginning to understand. It's not just about what we do in terms of energy and decarbonisation. It's what about our material impacts and how we use it. So I think that's what needs to be addressed in parallel. I don't know if it's a time. I mean, the timescale is 10 years for me, because we have to hit that first target, and by that time, our lives will be different, because to hit that target, the way they travel, the way that we use products will have to significantly change. So I think the time is now, but I think that if that's the point, I absolutely believe the time is now, and because I think there's a lot of attention on this agenda, a lot of people beginning to come in and think about, how do you shape the economy differently and involve everyone, and that's the key thing. That's what makes our journey here in Scotland, I still say quite often, I think quite different from other countries, who are looking at the circular economy. It's either very much business driven or top down, corporate driven, or entrepreneur driven, but ours does have everybody involved. We've got the community sector, we've got individual citizens, we've got initiatives right across the piece. We just need to increase the scalability of that at all levels, and I think now's the time.
And Libby, any thoughts on that sort of timescale and where we can prioritise, I suppose, in this drive to circular economy over the next decade?
Yeah, so I just wanted to pick up on the point that Iain was making about the way that we measure emissions and the targets that we've got at the moment, because there is a real problem with how internationally carbon is measured at the moment. We only have to take account for the territorial emissions that are created. And so whilst it's really ambitious for Scotland to aim for that net zero by 2045, that's only the territorial emissions that the targets are for, and the consumption emissions that we're ultimately responsible for already, as Iain said, account for about half of what we create. And by 2050, that is going to be over 90%. And so the real benefits of the circular economy should come to light because of that, because all of the analysis that I presented about the carbon benefits, those were only territorial emissions. So that was what was going to happen in the UK, because that's how we measure things at the moment. But with things like textiles and with electronics, the vast majority of those emissions occur outside the UK. So you'd actually have, for electronics, we didn't present this evidence, but 50 times greater savings in terms of carbon emissions outside the UK than you'd have in the UK. And so there is a real need for us to take responsibility in the first instance for those emissions. But also, I think the circular economy will really come into its own if we did do that, because you'd have so much more emphasis on keeping products and clothing and all those sorts of things in use for as long as possible and using fewer of them.
No, well, thank you both for those informed responses there, which I'm sure the members have listened to. And indeed, I think a really important point that's come through on our chat bar here is about the need for support, funding and resource support in the sector, given the importance and the move in our green recovery to a circular economy. So thank you very much to Elaine, Emma, Terry, Neil and Fiona, who have all been making that point really strongly. And I know that both Libby and Iain are strong advocates of the need for that, as is CRNS, and it's certainly been noted by everybody, the activity around that theme as well that's come through from both your presentations from our CRNS members. But I would like to thank you both a huge amount, especially for struggling through all our technology challenges here, and thank you to Cameron Live for sorting it all out, because that was an excellent session. You can just see that from the feedback and the activity and the questions we've had. So thank you to both Iain and to Libby for giving up your time to join us this morning. Thank you both so much.
Great.
And now it's time to network and explore the Hop-In conference once again. Please visit the marketplace and the amazing array of exhibitors that we have on offer for you. Enter the network area and meet up with your contacts and discuss how the conference is going and any thoughts you have. Don't forget also to look at the poll in the polls tab, and then at 11:30 click on your chosen breakout session. That's either David, Gary or Naomi. They'll be there. Enjoy those group discussions before we meet again here on the main stage at 12:15 for our spotlight on CRNS members. So see you then and enjoy your networking.